Turn every light off in your house for 1 hour. Not metaphorically, actually picture it. You already know exactly which hallway you'd bump into without thinking, which drawer you'd reach for without looking, which room you'd avoid completely because you're not entirely sure what's still in there. That's not a guess on your part. That's information you've been sitting on this whole time, quietly accumulated over months you weren't necessarily tracking on purpose. And over the next several days, the sky is about to run that exact experiment on your life, whether you opt into it consciously or not, whether you believe any of this changes a single thing about the actual physics involved or not. You're heading into the tail end of an eclipse season, the second half of a pairing that started with a total solar eclipse tracing a path across the Atlantic and into Europe, the kind of crossing that hadn't happened over that stretch of the continent since the late 90s. That first eclipse was the new moon half of the story, something starting quietly in the dark, planted before anyone could see what it actually was. This next one is the full moon half, and it isn't subtle about it. Close to 96% of the moon's face is going to slide into the Earth's shadow, which makes this the deepest lunar eclipse anyone will see until 2028. Greatest eclipse lands in the pre-dawn hours, when most of the world is either asleep or pretending to be. Astronomers will file it under Saros 138, log the precise timing down to the minute, and move on calmly to whatever the next entry on their calendar happens to be. You don't have to move on quite that fast. Here's the part worth sitting with before we go any further, because it's the actual engine behind everything in this video. An eclipse doesn't create the dark. It just temporarily removes the thing you'd been mistaking for the source of your light. A full moon is always full. The sun's glow is bouncing off it every single month, whether you happen to look up or not, whether anyone's filming it or not. What changes during an eclipse is that the usual dependable illumination gets interrupted for a few hours, and you're left looking at something with all the gloss stripped off it. Not a worse version of that thing. Not a fake version either. Just an unfiltered one, closer to how it actually is when nobody's adjusting the lighting for you. That's the whole mechanism running underneath the next few days, and it's a big part of why this window may feel less like everything is suddenly changing, and more like I'm finally seeing clearly something that was already true weeks ago. There's a second layer running underneath that first one, and it matters because it changes the texture of the whole window. Mercury just crossed out of Leo and into Virgo, which happens to be one of Mercury's own signs, the mind shifting gears from performance into precision, from telling a story well to getting a story right down to the detail. And close behind that move, the Sun is pulling into a near-exact alignment with Mercury, the kind of tight conjunction that tends to sharpen ordinary thinking right when you most need it sharp instead of foggy. Meanwhile, Saturn is still retrograde, still backing slowly through the sky, the way it has been for weeks now, which means whatever boundary or limit you've been quietly renegotiating with yourself has had extra time to actually settle into place instead of getting decided in a rushed, reactive moment. None of that timing is random or convenient marketing. It reads more like a system running its scheduled maintenance in the background, and you happen to be logged in and awake while it happens to run. There's a slower, quieter layer moving underneath both of those too, and it's worth naming even though it won't peak for another few days. Jupiter and Saturn have been drawing into a wide trine for weeks now, expansion and structure finally agreeing to work the same shift instead of pulling in opposite directions, and that angle keeps tightening through this stretch. It's not loud enough to notice on its own, but it means whatever you build out of what you see this week doesn't have to stay fragile. There's actual scaffolding forming underneath it, slowly, in the background, whether you're paying attention to it or not. So here's the honest premise for the next several days. No guaranteed outcomes attached to it. No promise of overnight transformation. Nothing that requires you to believe in anything you don't already believe. Just an invitation. Plainly stated, what do you actually know how to navigate without the lights on? Not what do you assume you know. What do you actually demonstrably know, the way you know your own hallway with your eyes closed? There are 6 rooms worth checking. Let's walk the house properly, one door at a time, and take our time with each one instead of rushing the tour. Worth pausing on why the pairing matters, not just the eclipse on its own. The solar eclipse a couple of weeks back was a new moon event, which in practice means it planted something without showing you the full shape of it yet. New moons work in the dark by nature, seeding rather than revealing. This lunar eclipse is the full moon on the opposite end of that same axis, and full moons do the opposite job. They illuminate what's already been growing, whether or not you consciously tended it. So if something's felt like it's been quietly building since the start of this month, slightly out of view, this is less a new event than it is the reveal of that same thread, same story, second half. Worth remembering that if anything below feels oddly familiar rather than brand new, familiar is usually the more accurate read. Start with the plan you're currently building your entire life around, because odds are reasonably good you didn't draw every line of it yourself. Somewhere along the way, a parent's quiet expectation you absorbed before you were old enough to question it, a timeline you picked up from the people immediately around you without ever comparing it to anything else, an earlier version of you who was frightened and made a perfectly reasonable call under genuinely bad conditions at the time. Someone handed you a set of specs. Get the degree, then the job, then the promotion, then the relationship milestone, then the house, roughly in that order, roughly on that schedule. You've been building carefully to code this whole time. The question this window tends to surface isn't whether the blueprint itself is bad. Plenty of inherited blueprints are perfectly sound. The real question is simpler and harder. Is it yours? Here's a concrete way you'll actually know, rather than just wondering about it abstractly. Picture the very next milestone on your personal blueprint, the next should, waiting for you a few months or years out. Now ask yourself honestly, without performing the answer for anyone, whether you feel forward motion toward it or obligation quietly dragging you toward it instead. Forward motion has a pull to it, something that pulls you even on the days you're tired. Obligation has a weight instead, something you carry rather than something that carries you. Those two sensations get confused constantly out in full daylight, when everything around you is staged just well enough to look like progress from the outside. In lower light, with the gloss temporarily off, the difference between the two tends to show up fast and uncomfortably clear. If you notice weight where you expected to feel pull, that's not eclipse-induced destruction of your life plan. That's simply a blueprint, finally getting read carefully by the one person who actually has to live inside the finished building. This shows up in smaller ways too, not just the big 5-year plan version. Maybe it's the way you automatically say yes to a certain kind of invitation because that's what a person like you does, even though the actual moment of saying yes felt like wait, rather than pull. Maybe it's a hobby you keep circling back to out of loyalty to who you used to be, rather than genuine appetite for who you are now. None of these need dramatic action this week. Structural changes to a life take real planning, not a single low-visibility night to decide everything at once, but actually noticing, on paper, if you're willing to write it down, which parts of your current plan came from your own hand and which parts arrived secondhand is the entire first move here. Nothing more dramatic than that. Just an honest set of initials at the bottom of the page. Did I actually sign off on this, or did I simply inherit it and never question the paperwork? It also shows up in the small, unglamorous specifics of daily life that never make it onto any 5-year plan. The way you budget your money according to what a responsible person supposedly does, even when a chunk of that spending brings you nothing close to pull. The way you keep a certain friendship at a certain distance because that's the role you were assigned in the friend group years ago, not because anything about the friendship has actually changed. Blueprints aren't only the big visible ones. Most people are carrying 2 or 3 quiet, unexamined ones at once, and this window tends to make exactly one of them noticeably harder to ignore than the others, almost like it's asking you to start there rather than trying to inspect all of them at once. Second place to check. The door in your own house you've been walking past for weeks now, maybe considerably longer than that. You know exactly which one it is. It's the conversation you've rehearsed in the shower a dozen times and never actually had out loud. The application you've opened 4 separate times and closed again without submitting. The person you keep almost texting, thumb hovering, then putting the phone face down instead. You're not remotely confused about where the room is. You've got the floor plan memorized down to the doorknob. What you've been avoiding isn't the location. It's what's actually waiting inside once you turn the handle and commit to looking. The Eclipse doesn't open that door for you. Nothing external does that part. That was never going to be true, and this video isn't going to pretend otherwise. What a window like this tends to do instead is turn down the volume on every other distraction that's been loud enough to keep the hallway interesting on its own. Fewer places left to look that aren't that door. And when the ambient noise around you drops even slightly, a strange, almost mundane thing tends to happen. The decision you'd built up in your head as impossibly complicated usually turns out to be far simpler than advertised. And the thing you'd been quietly assuming was simple turns out to be exactly the part you'd been avoiding on purpose, because some part of you already suspected the answer and didn't want it confirmed yet. Try this, concretely, instead of just nodding along. Pick the one door you've been walking past on repeat, and instead of deciding to fling it open this week, just decide to stand directly in front of it for a minute. Say out loud, even to an empty room, exactly what you think is behind it. Not what you're afraid might be behind it in the worst-case version. What you actually honestly believe is there when you're not catastrophizing. Most people who try this find that their honest, unglamorous guess and the eventual real outcome are far closer together than they expected. The Eclipse doesn't hand you new information here so much as it moves up the appointment with certainty you already privately have. And it's rarely only one door. Usually there's a smaller, less dramatic one right next to the obvious one. A boundary conversation with a friend you've let slide for months because the friendship itself is otherwise easy. An honest ask you owe a manager about scope or pay that you keep telling yourself isn't the right moment for. Those quieter doors get skipped constantly because the big one draws all the attention. Worth checking the hallway for more than just the one door you've already been staring at. Third stop, and this is the one that tends to surprise people the most when they actually pay attention to it. Notice what you learn about yourself over these next few days, not what you learn about your circumstances. Full daylight is flattering, and it's genuinely useful for plenty of things, but it's mostly built to show you your circumstances, the job title, the relationship status, the apartment, the 5-year plan, rather than showing you your own honest reactions to those circumstances, because in full light, you're usually too busy managing how those reactions look from the outside to actually register what they are. In lower light, self-observation gets a little easier, almost by accident, rather than effort. You might notice you feel relief instead of sadness about something you'd been telling everyone, including yourself, that you wanted badly. You might notice you check for a specific name and feel your shoulders visibly drop when it isn't there. A small, honest piece of information you'd been quietly managing around for a while instead of sitting with directly. You might notice that a goal you've been chasing hard for a year or two now produces something closer to dread than excitement when you picture actually reaching it, and that the dread has probably been sitting there for months, just outshone the whole time by momentum and other people's enthusiasm on your behalf. None of this is the eclipse handing down some kind of verdict about your life. It's closer to a smoke detector that only registers properly in the dark, because under normal daytime conditions, there's too much ambient light for the sensor to pick anything up clearly. The information itself was always there, sitting quietly the whole time. This window just happens to be quiet enough and dim enough for you to actually hear it register. Try writing down one single thing you notice about your own reaction to something this week. Not the event itself, specifically your reaction to it. That one honest sentence usually tells you more than a full month of journaling about the event ever would. This tends to show up around people as clearly as it shows up around goals. Notice, without judging it yet, who you found yourself genuinely wanting to reach out to this week versus who you contacted purely out of habit or obligation because it had been a while. Notice whose name brought a small, honest lift when it showed up on your screen, and who's brought something closer to a low, quiet dread you've been calling busyness. That's not a verdict on any relationship. It's simply data you can only really collect when you're not performing enthusiasm for an audience, and this window tends to lower the performance a notch or two without you having to try. Fourth, there's a real difference between an instrument reading and a direct observation, and this window tends to quietly reward trusting the second one over the first, at least when the two disagree. An instrument reading in this sense is what other people tell you a situation is. The group consensus, the friend's second-hand opinion, the metric everyone's citing, the general sense of everyone thinks. A direct observation is what you actually feel, specifically standing inside the room yourself. Think of one situation currently getting explained to you secondhand. A relationship someone close to you keeps narrating on your behalf. A job opportunity everyone around you agrees you'd be foolish to pass on. A plan the whole group has already quietly agreed is obviously the right call. Set the second-hand report aside for exactly 1 minute and ask only this: what did I actually feel the last time I was physically inside that room myself, rather than hearing a summary of it afterward? To be clear, this isn't a call to distrust the people around you wholesale, or to assume everyone giving you a second-hand read has bad intentions. Most of them are doing exactly what they say they're doing, giving you their honest read of their own experience, which is simply a different thing from your direct experience of the same situation. The instrument isn't lying to you. It's measuring something slightly adjacent to what you're actually standing inside of. Trusting your own window over the report doesn't mean throwing out every other instrument in the house. Take a job offer as the clean version of this, since it's specific enough to actually walk through. Everyone in your life has an opinion about the number, the title, the logo. That's the report. The room is the 20 minutes you actually spent on a call with the team, or the tour of the actual space, or the specific way a future manager answered a question you asked about workload. Not because other people are wrong on principle, or because their advice comes from a bad place, because they weren't physically standing in the room when it actually happened, reading the tone, catching the pause before the answer. Only you were, and that vantage point counts for something specific that no amount of second-hand consensus can fully replace. Fifth, and this is the one genuinely worth caution rather than fear. Plain, sober caution, not doom. Not every wall in a house is decorative, and this particular window has a specific, well-documented habit of making load-bearing walls look temporarily easy to knock straight through, a boundary you set carefully with a family member after a hard year, a private rule you made for yourself about who gets access to your evenings and who doesn't, a line you drew after getting genuinely burned once before that now feels inconvenient because someone you like is standing right on the other side of it, smiling, asking nicely. In lower light specifically, structural walls and purely cosmetic walls can look deceptively, almost identically similar. The renovation urge that tends to show up this week is often perfectly legitimate. Plenty of what you're carrying, really, is just old paint that's overdue for stripping, nothing structural about it at all. But before anything actually gets torn out of the wall, it's worth asking one direct, unglamorous question. If I remove this specific thing, does the room still hold its shape afterward? Or does something above it start to visibly sag once the support is gone? If you're genuinely not sure which answer applies, that uncertainty itself is your answer for right now. Structural decisions deserve full daylight and at least one honest second opinion from someone who isn't invested in the outcome one way or the other. Not a single low visibility night, a persuasive voice, and an audience quietly cheering you on toward demolition before anyone's checked the actual blueprint. This is the one place in the whole house where the actual invitation of this window is to slow down rather than move fast, which runs against the grain of everything else being suggested here. Notice the wall specifically. Name out loud, even just to yourself, what it's actually holding up above it. Decide later, in full ordinary light, with a clear head, whether it genuinely stays or genuinely goes. This applies just as much at work as it does at home, maybe more, because professional walls get mistaken for cosmetic ones constantly. The rule you have about not answering messages after a certain hour. The limit you set on how much unpaid extra scope you'll quietly absorb before saying something. Someone will probably frame removing one of these as flexibility, as being a team player, as no big deal, just this once. Ask the same load-bearing question before agreeing. Does the rest of your week still hold its shape without that wall in place? Or does something you're not currently watching start to sag the moment it's gone. Sixth, before the final walkthrough, check whether you've been comparing your own house to a neighbor's for so long that you've stopped noticing your own layout at all. This is a specific common trap during a window like this one, because low visibility makes other people's windows look brighter than usual by comparison, even when nothing about their actual situation has changed. Someone else's relationship looks more settled from across the street. Someone else's career looks like it's further along, better lit, more finished. You're seeing their porch light, not their actual house, and definitely not what it costs to run it. Here's a fair, specific question to ask. Instead of the comparison your mind defaults to automatically. If you couldn't see anyone else's house at all this week, no feeds, no updates, no second-hand reports about who's doing what, would you still feel behind? For a lot of people, the honest answer is no. The feeling of being behind isn't coming from an actual measurement against your own goals. It's coming from a borrowed yardstick held up next to a house you've never actually walked through, only glimpsed from the street, at its best angle, usually with the porch light on, and the rest of it deliberately unlit. This doesn't mean the comparison is always meaningless, or that you should ignore other people's lives entirely. Sometimes, watching someone else genuinely does show you a door in your own house you hadn't noticed yet. That's useful, and it's different from simply feeling behind. The difference is whether it points you back towards your own hallway or keeps you standing on the sidewalk. One version sends you back inside with a new idea. The other just keeps you outside in the cold, running comparisons that were never fair to begin with, because you were comparing your unfinished, occupied, actually lived-in house against someone else's carefully staged one. Seventh and last stop on the tour. The light comes back. It always does. That's the one part of every single eclipse that's fully guaranteed, more than anything else claimed in this video. Once it does return, you get one more chance that most people skip entirely in their rush to get back to normal: the walkthrough. Before you simply move back into your ordinary life exactly as it was, arranged in precisely the same configuration as before, it's worth doing one slow, deliberate pass through everything you actually noticed over these past several days. The blueprint, the door, the private reaction, the gap between the report and the room, the wall you almost tore straight out without checking first. You don't have to rebuild anything overnight, and nobody's asking you to. The walkthrough isn't a renovation project, it's an honest inventory. Nothing more dramatic than that. What do you actually want to keep exactly as it already is? No changes needed. What gets moved slightly? Not demolished, just repositioned, now that you can actually see where it really sits, rather than where you assumed it sat. What turns out to have been completely fine the whole time, and you were only ever unsettled by it because you'd genuinely never taken the time to look closely before now. That's the real quiet payoff of a window like this one. Not some dramatic overnight overhaul of your entire life, just a considerably more accurate map of the house you're already living in every single day. If you want a practical version of the walkthrough, rather than just the idea of it, keep it to paper. 6 short lines, 1 per room, written fast without editing yourself. The blueprint I'm questioning, the door I'm still avoiding, the reaction that surprised me, the report that didn't match the room, the wall I almost tore out, and the one thing I want to keep exactly as it is. 10 minutes, no more. The value isn't in how polished the sentences are. It's in having 6 honest lines on paper instead of 6 vague impressions still floating around your head, half-formed, easy to talk yourself out of by next week. Here's the honest, unglamorous version of what tends to change for people who actually walk through all 6 rooms instead of just watching the sky happen and moving straight on with their week. Less automatic deference to appearances that don't actually match your own direct read of a room. A noticeably clearer sense of which parts of your life plan are genuinely yours to keep building on, and which parts were drawn up by someone else's hand a long time ago. A little more trust day to day in the quiet, specific things you personally notice about your own reactions, instead of managing every single feeling into something more presentable before you've even honestly looked at what it actually is. Picture the same ordinary Tuesday 2 ways, a few weeks apart. Before the walkthrough, you say yes to the plan because saying no feels like too much explaining. You let the report decide the job. You keep walking past the same door, and by evening, you're tired in a way that has nothing to do with how much you actually did that day. After it, you say no to the same kind of plan without a paragraph of justification attached, because you've already got the 6 lines on paper reminding you which sensation is pull and which is weight. Nothing about the external week necessarily looks that different from the outside. What's different is how much of it you're spending managing a house you never actually inspected. None of that requires the eclipse to actively do anything to you, as if it's some outside force reaching down into your week. It requires you specifically to actually stand in the dark room for a minute instead of reaching straight for the switch out of pure habit. Most people reach for the switch immediately, without thinking twice, and honestly, that's completely fine. That's most ordinary weeks of the year. This is simply the one stretch where staying in the dim room a little longer than usual tends to genuinely pay off, because the information it quietly hands you doesn't show up nearly as clearly once full daylight and the flattering shine of ordinary routine come back and start dressing everything up again. It's worth saying plainly what this isn't too, since the title of this video leans hard into urgency, and it's fair to want that named directly. This isn't a countdown to disaster if you don't act by a certain hour. It isn't a warning that something bad happens to you, specifically if you skip the walkthrough. The genuine stakes here are quieter and, honestly, more useful than that. A rare, unusually deep eclipse gives you an unusually clear look at something you'd otherwise keep half avoiding for months through ordinary daylight distraction. Miss this particular window, and you don't get punished for it. You just wait for the next quiet stretch to notice the same thing, likely with a little more accumulated weight attached to it by then. If you only take one single action from everything in this video, make it small and make it specific rather than sweeping. Pick just one of the 6 rooms: the blueprint, the door, the reaction, the report versus the room, the wall, or the final walkthrough, and give it 10 honest, undistracted minutes sometime over the next few days. Not a journal entry performed for an imagined audience later. Not a decision you announce to everyone before you've even sat with it. Just 10 quiet minutes, alone, with the lights figuratively off, asking the one honest question that particular room has been quietly holding for you this whole time. That's genuinely the entire assignment here, nothing more elaborate than that. Not change everything about your life, not stay completely alone and simply wait for the universe to fix it for you. Just go stand in the one room you already know by memory and actually look, this time, properly, instead of walking past it again out of habit. If any part of this genuinely landed for you, if you recognized your own hallway somewhere in one of these 7 rooms as I described them, That's worth sitting with for a moment, rather than scrolling straight past onto the next thing. It's easy to nod along to a video like this and forget it within the hour, back to the feed, back to the noise, back to the porch light of somebody else's house. The 6 or 7 lines on paper are what actually separate a video you watched from a window you used. One evaporates by tomorrow. The other one is still sitting in a notebook in your own handwriting whenever you need to check it again. This channel, Psyche Realms, walks through moments like this one on a regular basis, matching what's actually happening in the sky to what it tends to mean for the people living underneath it day to day. Without the guesswork and without the guaranteed predictions, nobody can honestly make about your specific life. The goal here has never been to tell you exactly what's going to happen to you this week. Nobody watching a sky chart can honestly promise that, and anyone who does is selling you certainty they don't have. The goal is narrower and hopefully more useful, pointing out which rooms are worth checking and trusting you to do the actual looking yourself. And whatever you end up finding behind your own door this week, you're the one who gets to decide what you actually do with it. Not the eclipse, not this video, not the group chat, not the report, not the porch light next door. You specifically standing in your own hallway in the one house you actually have to live in every day, whether the lights are on or not. The light was always going to come back on eventually, no matter what happens between now and then. The only real question worth asking, this week or any other, was ever what you'd choose to notice while it was off.